chosen one there is a kind of man, and you will know him when you see him, though he rarely announces himself, who walks through the world carrying something invisible. He does not wear it on his sleeve. He does not hang it in a frame above his fireplace. It is not a trophy, not a certificate, not a LinkedIn endorsement from someone whose name trends on Thursday afternoons. What he carries is something far older and far quieter than any of that. It is the knowledge, settled deep in the marrow of him, that he has been chosen, not by a committee, not by a corporation, not by the applause of a crowd whose favor shifts like weather in April. He has been chosen by the author of all things, and the choosing was done before he had done anything at all to deserve it. Now let us be careful here, because the word chosen has been badly misused by badly formed people for a very long time. Every conman believes he is chosen. Every despot with a flag and a philosophy has painted himself as destiny's instrument. The man who believes himself chosen because he is clever, because he has worked hard, because his grandmother once told him he was special, that man is not chosen in any meaningful sense. He is merely vain, and vanity is a counterfeit of vocation. The genuine article looks nothing like the counterfeit. The genuine article is not loud. It does not require an audience. It does not need to be believed by Tuesday. The truly chosen man is, more often than not, deeply unsettled by the choosing. He did not ask for it. He would in many moments prefer to give it back. There is a story older than any story we have been taught in school, a story told in the oldest of books, in which a man is called out of his ordinary life and sent towards something enormous, and his first response is not triumph. His first response is something closer to terror. This is the authentic signature of the real thing. God does not choose the proud, because the proud have already chosen themselves, and there is no vacancy left for him to fill. He chooses the ones who know, with painful clarity, that they are not sufficient. And then, this is the strange and magnificent logic of it, he makes them sufficient anyway. But we were not only speaking of being chosen in some vague spiritual sense. We were speaking of something more specific and, to the modern mind, more suspicious. We were speaking of money. We were speaking of the peculiar and alarming experience of receiving material provision from a source that cannot be fully explained by spreadsheets or strategy. We were speaking of the moment when a man looks at his account and cannot account for what he sees there, not because he has been reckless or dishonest, quite the opposite. He has often been faithful in small things, faithful when it made no economic sense to be faithful, faithful when the rational voice in his head was composing a very reasonable letter of resignation. And then, without fanfare, without a press release, without any of the mechanisms by which the world normally distributes its rewards, something arrives. It arrives the way rain arrives on soil that has been waiting a long time. It arrives the way dawn arrives, not announced, not argued into existence, simply present when the night has finished its work. A contract materializes, a door opens that was not there the day before, a stranger becomes an ally. A problem that seemed permanent dissolves overnight into an opportunity. And the man who receives this stands in the middle of it with the very unmodern feeling that he did not engineer this. He received it. This is where wisdom becomes urgent, because the world in which we live is not, on the whole, sympathetic to the idea of received blessing. The world's story about wealth is one of pure mechanism. Work harder, think smarter, position better, network wider, disrupt something, monetize something else. This is not entirely false. God is not in the business of rewarding laziness and calling it faith. But the world's story taken as the whole story leaves no room for the unmistakable fact that some provisions arrive through channels that no strategist could have predicted and no algorithm could have generated. There is a realm of operation in which the normal laws of cause and effect are not suspended exactly but deepened, expanded, made to do more than they usually do. The man who has received wealth from this realm faces a particular temptation, and it is a temptation that comes dressed as a virtue, which makes it especially dangerous. The temptation is to explain it, to contextualize it in the language of merit and mechanism so that it feels less like a gift and more like a result. This is understandable. We live in a culture that is extremely uncomfortable with the passive voice, with being acted upon rather than acting, and there is something in us, some deep old pride, that resists gratitude because gratitude requires admission of need, and admission of need feels dangerously close to weakness. But the man who explains away his blessing loses something essential in the explaining. He loses the very orientation that made the blessing possible. He trades a living relationship for a dead formula. He tells himself, and anyone who will listen, that he succeeded because of his system, his method, his discipline, his vision, and all of these things may have played their part, truly, but in doing so he quietly removes from the story the one who was writing it. And when you remove the author from the story, you do not get a story that is merely incomplete. You get a story that will eventually become incoherent. Keep quiet then, not because silence is cowardice, not because you are ashamed of what you have received. Keep quiet because the deepest things do not survive constant exposure. There is a reason that seeds germinate underground, in the dark, out of sight. The process of becoming requires protection from certain kinds of attention. When a man announces too early, too loudly, too often, what God is doing in his life, he does several destructive things simultaneously. He invites the envy of people who are not yet ready to rejoice with him. He invites the scrutiny of people who are looking for reasons to disbelieve. He invites his own pride, which is always waiting just off stage, to walk to the center and take a bow it did not earn. And perhaps most dangerously, he shifts his attention from the giver to the gift, and from the gift to the performance of having the gift. And in that shift, something crucial is lost. There is a deep difference between testimony and exhibition. Testimony is what a man gives when the time is right, when the soil of another person's life is ready to receive it, when the truth of what happened will illuminate rather than impress. Exhibition is what happens when a man cannot wait for the right time because he needs the validation now. Testimony serves others. Exhibition serves the self. And the chosen man, if he is truly wise, learns, often through painful experience, that exhibition is a slow leak in the vessel that God has been filling. Stay wise. This is the second counsel, and it is harder in practice than it sounds in principle. Wisdom in this context is not merely intelligence, though it requires intelligence. It is not merely experience, though experience contributes to it. Wisdom is the capacity to see things as they actually are, including yourself, including your resources, including the nature of the provision you have received, and to act accordingly. Wisdom knows that money given by God for a purpose is not the same as money earned by a man for his own pleasure, even if it looks the same in the bank account. The identical figures on identical screens can carry entirely different obligations depending on their origin and their intended destination. This is why the chosen man who has received unusual provision must ask, with genuine and sustained seriousness, not only what he has received but why. What is this for? Wealth given by God is almost never given simply to make the recipient comfortable. Comfort is too small a purpose for the kind of provision we are describing. It is seed capital for something the world needs. It is resources for a work that would not otherwise have the means to proceed. It is the material expression of a mandate, and if the mandate is forgotten or ignored, the provision will eventually find its way to someone who takes the mandate seriously. God is not sentimental about this. He is extraordinarily patient, but he is not sentimental. The staying wise, therefore, includes a ruthless and regular honesty about stewardship. How is this being used? Is it growing? Is it serving the purpose for which it arrived? Is it being protected from the hands of those who would use it for lesser purposes, including the hands of the recipient himself when he is having an undisciplined day? The wise man treats received provision the way a serious farmer treats an extraordinary harvest. With gratitude, yes, but also with extraordinary care, extraordinary planning, and an eye toward the next season's planting. And yet, and this counterpoint must not be swallowed by the serious things, wisdom also knows joy. The chosen man who has received well and lived rightly has permission to enjoy what he has been given. This is not a contradiction. The father who gives does not resent the child who takes pleasure in the gift. The error is not in enjoying, the error is in stopping at enjoyment, in confusing the pleasure of the gift for its entire meaning. A man can taste good wine at a good table with gratitude in his chest, and a clear awareness that there are people who have never tasted anything like it. And that awareness ought to move him toward generosity rather than guilt. Guilt is not the appropriate response to blessing. Generosity is. But now we must return to the beginning and speak of the silence again, because the silence is not only about protecting the work, it is about something deeper than strategy. It is about the nature of the relationship between the chosen man and the one who chose him. This relationship is, at its core, not a transaction. It is not an arrangement between a patron and a contractor. It is something far more intimate and frankly far more demanding than that. It requires the kind of trust that does not constantly need to be discussed because it is lived. It requires the kind of loyalty that is not performance, not demonstration, not the loyalty of someone who knows he is being watched. It is the loyalty of a man who would behave the same way in the empty room as in the full one, because he understands that there are no truly empty rooms. The chosen man who keeps quiet about his wealth is not hiding it. He is honoring it. He is understanding, perhaps for the first time in his life, that not all treasure needs to be displayed to be real. The most important things in any life are invisible to the casual observer. The love between a man and his wife in a long and good marriage. The conviction that holds a man steady when the argument against integrity is loudest. The peace that lives at the bottom of a truly trusting soul even when circumstances are making their worst noise. These things are not diminished by being unseen. They are in a certain sense authenticated by it. The man who must show you his peace does not have it. The man who must show you his wealth is afraid it will disappear if others do not confirm it. There is also a practical wisdom in the silence that has nothing to do with spirituality and everything to do with the behavior of the world. Money draws attention. Unusual money draws unusual attention, and not all of it is benign. There are people, and they are not necessarily malicious people, sometimes they are simply frightened or envious or confused, who will attempt to attach themselves to provision that is not theirs. There are schemes that arrive wearing the clothing of opportunity. There are requests that come dressed as needs. There are relationships that materialize precisely when the account balance becomes visible and evaporate precisely when it becomes less so. The chosen man who has not yet learned discernment is vulnerable to all of these. The silence is, among other things, a preliminary filter. The man who does not broadcast his resources does not attract the parasitic attention that broadcasting would produce. But let us be honest about the full weight of what keeping quiet costs. It is not free. The man who has received extraordinary provision and cannot fully speak of it lives with a peculiar loneliness. He cannot explain certain decisions to people who make decisions purely on the basis of the visible. He cannot justify certain generosities without revealing what he has. He cannot share the full story of his journey with people who are not yet equipped to hear it, without either envying him or misunderstanding him. He must learn to live with being partially known, which is uncomfortable for creatures who are made for full knowing and full being known. This is part of the cost of the choosing, and it is a real cost, not a dramatic one. It is the quiet ache of the steward who must keep certain things confidential, not because he is ashamed, but because discretion is part of his assignment. The ancient writers knew this. They wrote about it in the language of their time, but the substance is unchanged across the centuries. There is a passage in the oldest wisdom literature of the world about a man who was stripped of everything he had, wealth, family, health, reputation, and who spent the middle of his story in the company of friends who were quite certain they understood why. His friends were intelligent. His friends were sincere. His friends had a perfectly coherent theology of cause and effect, and they were wrong. They were wrong because they assumed that the visible circumstances fully described the invisible reality. They applied their formulas to a situation that was operating by a different logic, and they produced confident conclusions that were confident nonsense. The chosen man who has received unusual wealth must resist becoming one of those friends to himself. He must resist the formula that says this blessing confirms that he is righteous, that he is correct, that his theology is validated, that his methods are endorsed, that his enemies are answered. The blessing is not a verdict on everything he has ever done or believed. It is an invitation to the next chapter, and the next chapter has its own tests and its own requirements. The man who mistakes provision for approval misreads the situation at the very moment when clear reading matters most. Stay wise about people. This is specific and practical and cannot be said gently enough. When money comes from God, it will attract both the best and the worst of humanity toward you. The best, people of genuine character and genuine vision who are looking for someone with resources and integrity to come alongside something that matters. The worst, people of charm and need and compelling narratives who have learned through long practice how to recognize and attach to financial capacity. The difference between these two groups is not always apparent in the first meeting, or the second, or sometimes even the fifth. Wisdom here means patience. It means the willingness to wait and watch before committing. It means asking the question not only of who this person is, but of who they become under pressure, under disappointment, under the word no. And stay wise about seasons. Provision comes in seasons, and the man who treats an abundant season as though it will last forever without maintenance, without faithfulness, without continued alignment with the source, is making the same mistake as the man in the old story who built a larger barn to store his surplus and called himself sorted. The surplus is not the point. What you do with the surplus, and for whom, and in what spirit, that is the point. The barn is not the destination, The barn is an instrument. There is a kind of freedom that becomes available to the man who has truly understood all of this. It is not the freedom of indifference, the false freedom of the man who says money does not matter to him because he does not yet have any. It is the freedom of the man who has it, and has not been owned by it, who can hold it with an open hand because he knows where it came from and trusts that what is needed will continue to come, who can give without calculating the remainder because he does not ultimately rely on the remainder. This is a freedom that very few people ever taste, because it requires a level of trust that feels to the unexercised soul dangerously close to recklessness. But it is not recklessness. It is the most stable position possible, the position of the man who is not standing on his money but is standing on the character of the one who gave it. The world will offer this man many explanations for his own life. It will tell him he was lucky. It will tell him he was smart. It will tell him the timing was right, the market was favorable, the stars aligned in a configuration that simply had his name on it by coincidence. Some of these observations will contain fragments of truth, the way a broken mirror contains fragments of a reflection, but they will not contain the whole truth, and the chosen man who accepts the fragment as the whole has traded his inheritance for a story that is smaller than what actually happened. So he keeps his own counsel. He lets the world have its explanations. He does not argue, does not perform, does not seek to correct every misreading of his biography. There is a time for testimony, as we said, and he will know it when it comes. But he does not confuse that time with every conversation, every dinner, every online exchange where someone is curious about his success. He speaks when speaking serves the other person. He is silent when silence serves the work. He trusts that the truth has a way of making itself known in time, not through announcement but through fruit. He tends his fruit quietly. He prays early. He thinks carefully. He gives generously. He protects the provision with diligence and spends it with purpose. He keeps the account before the right judge, not the judge of public opinion, not the judge of industry peers, not even the judge of his own fluctuating self-assessment on a bad Tuesday morning. He keeps it before the one who gave it and says, simply, "Here is what I have done with what you gave me." He does not pad the report. He does not perform for it. He says what is true, and if what is true is that he has not done well, he says that too, and asks for correction, not condemnation. This is the interior life of the chosen man who has received from God and is trying, imperfectly and earnestly, to stay wise. It is not glamorous in the way that the world calls glamorous. It is not the life of the man on the platform with the testimony that draws applause. It is the life of the man in the early morning with the silence and the question, what is this for, and am I using it rightly, and who needs what I have been given today? These questions, asked and answered honestly over years and decades, are what build something the world cannot see and cannot buy. A character that is genuinely worth having, a reputation in the only court that ultimately matters, and a life that, when it reaches its final page, will be found to have been in the deepest and most irreducible sense faithful. The chosen man does not need you to believe this. He does not need the world to validate the story he is living. He already knows what happened. He was there when the doors opened that had no business opening. He was there in the rooms where the numbers did not add up until they did. He was there when the provision arrived, not from the direction he was watching, but from the direction he had forgotten to watch because it seemed so unlikely. He knows the shape of what occurred. He does not need it framed and exhibited. He keeps it in the place where the most important things are kept, close, quiet, tended with care, offered back in gratitude to the one who placed it there to begin with. And that is enough. That is in fact more than enough. That is everything.